What's up, everybody? How are we doing? Happy Friday, December 13th, Friday the 13th. Let's give a shout out Taylor Swift. It's her 35th birthday today. Gang, gang, Taylor. Taylor Swift's 35th birthday. I'm a Swiftie at heart. You guys know that back in the day, me and some guy friends, whenever Taylor Swift had a new album come out, we'd have like a listening party. We'd only drink rosé wine. We'd get in our masculine and we'd have a bunch of cats and we would drink rosé wine and have a Taylor Swift listening party. It was a very testosterone filled event. It was fantastic. How are we doing, everyone? So I'm a little later here hopping on. I had to eat something. And so that's why I'm about 20 minutes late here. I had to eat some lunch. I hadn't eaten anything. And I was like, if I'm going to talk here for potentially an hour, I got to have at least something in my stomach. So that's with the delay. So I appreciate for those of you who hung in there. You know what I mean? We're like, where the fuck are you, Jamie? Got to get your fucking ass on here so you can speak to us. Well, I'm here now, guys. I'm here now. So Friday, December 13th, YouTube Live. We are talking about being stuck in the spiritual awakening process. We are going to talk about being stuck in spiritual stagnation. So when we're stuck in the spiritual awakening process, so a lot of people that are watching this are probably like, first off, what's our level of fear like, right? So when we talk about being stuck in the spiritual awakening process, what's happening is like we're dealing with a lot of fear, right? So anyone who's watching this, like who's dealing with a lot of fear right now? Who has a lot of fear that's coming up in this awakening process? Because fear is really what, has us immobilized. Fear is what has us, we're in sort of a fawn response, or we're contracted, or we're shut down in our system. We're stuck in stagnation. We're idle. You know what happens, you guys, in the spiritual awakening process is sometimes people stay in stagnation. We stay idle for years. We stay idle. I can't fucking speak. We stay idle and we stay stuck in stagnation for years. This can happen to a lot of people in the spiritual awakening process where we're basically stuck. We don't really know how we're able to move, right? And particularly as we're being called into, new patterns, new identities, a new paradigm, a new way of operating in the world, that we can just feel this large amount of resistance. And sometimes we can't even identify that we're feeling what we're feeling. We can't even identify that we're feeling what we're feeling. So the way that we're going to kind of enter this topic, you guys, is I'm going to bring in this idea of, okay, how do we get out of stagnation? Like, what does that really look like? What is the actual sort of psychology of how would we get out of stagnation? And people going through an awakening process and feeling stuck is probably one of the most common things. The amount of, like, I even have so many friends who are being called sort of spiritually, but they're kind of stuck. They've kind of maybe dipping a toe, but they won't really like allow themselves to go all the way in. And because they have so much fear present in their body. They have so much fear present in their body. So the concept that we're going to actually introduce here is to get out of stagnation, to get out of being idle. What actually has to happen is God has to become your daddy. God has to become your daddy. And what I mean by that is God has to become your inner father. God has to become your inner daddy. Maybe Mary Magdalene has to become your inner mommy or your inner mother. What I mean by this, think about what happens in a spiritual awakening is you are shifting a paradigm. You are moving into a new form of consciousness, which means that you're going to have to access a level of capacity that you have never accessed before. In order to move into a new paradigm and a new form of consciousness, you're going to have to access an internal capacity that you have never been able to access before, nor have you ever experienced before. You guys have heard the term reparenting. everyone on here, has done any sort of fucking therapy, has any sort of interest in sort of self-development and personal growth, has heard the term reparenting. You have to reparent yourself. The concept that I'm bringing forward here, which is basically the basis of what we're going to talk about, is that God has to become your inner parent. The godly self has to become your inner parent. Means the inner God or the inner goddess inside of you has to be able to guide your child out of stagnation, out of the idle constriction, and into the new earth and the new promised land of this paradigm that you're trying to move into. So you're not just having to learn to reparent yourself, but there has to be a godly self inside of you who can grab and hold the hand of your inner child and say, follow me, trust me. This is why the ancestors in your body hold on. When we think about why are we holding all this ancestral energy, holding on to ancestral energy is going to be one of the main reasons why when you're trying to go through a spiritual initiation, you're stuck. Your ancestors are still holding on. They don't trust you. They don't trust you enough because they have not been able to witness your godly self, the divine self, the higher self, to grab the hand of your inner child and say, come this way. Let me lead you. Do you guys get this? Do you understand this? The really challenging part about this is that we're in the unknown. We're in a foreign place. We're in a foreign world where we don't have anything to tether and cling on to. It is the great wide open, sort of this empty abyss that we have never experienced. So we're having to build a capacity and build a paradigm for ourselves in a place that we've never experienced before. And what actually happens, and what's really common here, is that we don't trust ourselves. Maybe we get a message or we get sort of, some sort of download or transmission from God that comes within us, but we don't trust it. We don't trust that voice. It's too quiet inside of us. We doubt it. We're like, that can't be true. I'm not that powerful. I don't have that level of intuition or that level of clarity. So we doubt it. We doubt sort of the knowing that is trying to come through us. And often, you guys, the reason why we doubt the knowing, because if I have to tap into this knowing and allow it to live inside of me, then I have to actually live through the prophecy that I'm a spiritually gifted being, that I am powerful, that I'm going to hold and embody my power. The reason why we doubt ourselves is because it's essentially we're pushing away our power. We're pushing away our power. Every time we sort of gaslight our own experience, we're pushing away our power. Maybe you have something that's coming in your space right now, some sort of transmission that's saying you need to go in this direction, that something is coming through, but you push it away. What you're doing is you're gaslighting your reality. Now what happens is you live in a wound of I'm not heard, I'm not seen, I'm not known. But you're pushing away God that's coming through you. You're pushing it away. Right now, something is trying to come through your channel. What is your relationship to what is coming through your channel? Do you allow it to overwhelm you like a magic blanket? Or do you push it away with doubt, fear, insecurity? That can't be right. I can't be that tapped in. I can't manifest that. That can't be true. What we're doing is we're denying our power. We're gaslighting our reality. Now what happens is we live in a space where we carry this wound that I'm not seen. I'm perpetually misunderstood. When you allow your power to come through you, you move into a space of all knowing. What you're doing is you're building a safe haven in the reality that is coming through you. And you can recognize where you're not seen and you're not heard. No, they don't see me. They don't get me because I have allowed my power to come through me like a warm blanket. I feel it in my body. Other people might interpret this as self-righteousness or a self-inflation, but you trust the integrity of how it lives in your body. Now what's happening is the transmission of where you're being guided by God. You've created a safe haven in your body and you've allowed it to live through you. Now what happens is a reality starts to feel safe in a way that it's never felt safe before. This is how you build a new earth. You guys, how you build a new earth or a new vibrational sort of frequency is your relationship to allowing deeper threads and cords of knowing to live in your body. When you allow deeper threads and cords of knowing in your body and you trust it, basically what I'm talking about is your capacity to trust your psychic intuition. Maybe you're feeling that little thread and cord in your life, those little whispers and shouts. God is speaking to me. It's guiding me in a certain direction. What happens is we stay stuck when we push that away. We push it away. What happens if I allow it? And I actually realize my capacity. I actually realize what I'm capable of. If I actually realize what I'm capable of, then I have to move in the totality of my power. And so we always create this internal war with ourself and spirit to some degree, which creates this immobilized stagnation in our system. We don't feel seen. We don't feel known. We feel in internal strife and conflict with ourselves. Our body shuts down. Our body contracts because something is trying to come through and we don't trust the message. We don't trust the message. We push it away because we're afraid. You guys, what happens if you allow the message to come through and it becomes fully realized in you? And everything that you sort of felt, those big sort of prophecies inside of you begin to come true. What happens then? We're afraid because it's going to take us away from maybe certain communities of people. Maybe it's going to change relationship to family. Maybe we're afraid of how other people are going to perceive us, that we think we're hot shit or we're self-inflated or we're self-righteous because we're allowing this knowing to live inside of us. Maybe what it's going to create a separation with what is no longer serving us. We're essentially going to become more sort of polarized in the truth that is trying to come through us. We're going to become more polarized in the truth that is going to come through us. Your internal knowing, that psychic intuition, is God trying to come through you and guide your inner child into a new earth. There's a godly self inside of you. There's a goddess self inside of you. There is some part of you that is in total knowing. In total knowing. This is why always when I work with clients and they move into this space, I don't allow them to doubt their spiritual gifts. I don't allow them to use language like maybe. I don't allow them to engage with the frequency that is coming through them. What happens, you guys, is we have an internal battle. I guarantee right now, all of you who are watching this right now who are stuck, you're stuck. And the reason why you're stuck is because you're battling two parts of you. There's a part of you that doubts. There's a part of you that says, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm delusional. There's another part of you that is all-knowing. There's another part of you that knows exactly what's happening. So what happens is people are on the spiritual path and they say, I don't know. When actually the truth and the way that we combat fear is with reality. The way that we combat fear is with reality. Because what happens is fear is actually like a sensory sort of inflated version of delusion. Fear is not reality. So the way that we combat fear is with reality. So when we say to ourselves, I don't know what's happening. Say you're going through some awakening process. You're like, I don't know what's happening. Bullshit. Bullshit. The truth is a part of you knows what's happening. The truth is, a part of you knows what's happening. Do you understand what changes in the body when you say to myself, a part of me knows exactly what is happening? All of a sudden, that fear starts to shake in its boots. All of a sudden, that fear that felt like a totalitarian sort of dictator starts to shake in their boots. Reality is coming. They are living in a vibration of reality which confronts the dictator of fear. Now, the way that fear stood on a throne in the body begins to sort of shake and sort of, ooh, I don't like how that feels. And now that fear isn't quite as strong. It starts to get kind of freed up a little bit. Things start to move a little bit. It's not that I don't know. The truth is, a part of me knows. Because what is actually true is there is a godly self inside of you that we're fucking terrified of. We're terrified of. We're terrified of because who am I to say that I have a godly self inside of me? What sort of pompous, sort of pretentious, sort of self-inflated, self-righteous fucking asshole am I to say that I have a godly self inside of me? That is the truth. You're made of the stars and star dust. You're made of the cosmos. You do have a divine knowing inside of you, but we shut it down. This is why we stay idle in stagnation, because the fear, the totalitarian dictator of fear is leading your godly knowing into submission. It's like this. And so what happens when we come to reality? This is why I always get my clients, when we deal with fear, when you deal with fear, you always combat fear with statements that are birthed in the earth of reality. You don't, when a client is like, I don't know what's happening, you say, a part of me knows exactly what's happening. Which one's more accurate? I have no idea what's happening. No. Even if it's like a small little thread or cord in the body, there is a part of them that knows exactly what's happening. But what happens, you guys, when we say, I know what's happening, or a part of me knows what's happening, now the frequency in our body changes. Now the frequency in your body changes and everything becomes really, really real. The fact that things are changing in your life, that the tides are turning and churning, it becomes really real in your body. Your power becomes real in your body. There is no avoiding the godly spiritual gifts from the higher dimensional realms that are coming through you. When you confront fear with reality, now there's a shift, right? The totalitarian dictator of fear is now challenged, and God begins to rise from the ashes. What's happening is your ancestors that hold like ancient karmic contracts in your body, are perceiving and receiving you in this relationship between a godly knowing and the totalitarian dictator of fear. Your ancestors are perceiving this exchange. When the dictator of fear is pummeling God and the goddess in you into submission, your ancestors grab onto you with a squeeze hold. They grab onto you like a vice grip and they say, Jamie needs us. Jamie needs us because this fear is present, which what it basically does is it binds the ancestral cord threads and patterns in place so we can't move. Now, what we live in an immobilized, chronic state of stagnation, unable to move. What I am teaching here, this is what I call divine reparenting. What I'm teaching here is divine reparenting. You'll see the psychological community that's talking about reparenting. This is a higher level version of reparenting where God becomes your parent. This is how you lead yourself out of stagnation in a spiritual awakening or a spiritual initiation. What you're having to do is build a capacity to hold your little boy, your little girl, the wounded aspects of yourself at a different frequency than you've ever been able to hold them before. Imagine as if there's a hero inside of you that is leading your little boy or your little girl and carrying that little boy or little girl out of a natural disaster. The hero self, an ancient capacity inside of you, is leading and holding this inner child into a safe haven, into a safe place in a way that we've never done before. This is what divine reparenting is. So the ancestors are watching. The ancestors are trying to see ancestral energy, the karmic contracts. Think about the different patterns that plague your lineage. What they're doing is they're watching and they're observing us. And they will hold on in the space as long as they have to. They will hold in the space as long as they have to. So what happens when we say, a part of me knows what's happening? A part of me trusts. What I'll even talk about for me is that what I feel right now that is happening in my space, that 2025 is going to be the year that I'm fully going to step into the vibration of my higher self. And everything that I've been building internally is going to begin to explode externally. So let's say this sort of message is coming to me. And I respond to that message and I'm like, Jamie, you're fucking delusional. And sure, any sort of, we need a healthy dose of delusion to do anything. If we don't have a healthy dose of delusion, we stay so pragmatic and entrenched in fear that we never do anything. God and delusion are so closely synonymous with each other. But say I have this download that 2025 is going to be the year that I'm going to move into this vibration of my higher self, and I'm going to go to a trailer in Marfa, Texas, and I'm going to write this book that I've been writing in my mind and my body and my energetic being for years, and I'm actually going to execute and bring this to life, and everything's going to begin to happen. If I actually live in that knowing, now what happens is I have an opportunity to conquer the fear. But if I push that knowing away, Jamie, 2025, I'm having these downloads that this year is going to be about this. If I push that away, now what happens is fear begins to creep forward. Fear begins to get larger and more luminous. And now what happens is the ancestors are perceiving this. The ancestors are perceiving this. They're like, okay, I need to keep holding on to Jamie's neck. I need to keep gripping onto Jamie's neck because he's not ready. He's not ready to become realized. He's not ready to know what he's truly capable of. He's not ready to truly come into his divinity. He's not ready to truly come into his liberation and his freedom. So the ancestors hold us like a vice grip right here. And it's because I pushed that statement away that 2025 was going to be this. I pushed that knowing away. And one big thing that we're afraid of, maybe it's my spiritual ego. Maybe it's my spiritual ego. And what has to happen with our spiritual ego, you guys, is we do have to go through an experience where we thought we were living in knowing, but it actually turned out that it was the spiritual ego. And we get humbled. We get humbled. As a spiritual being, we most often have to go through a process. Maybe it's a relationship that we thought was all knowing. This relationship is my salvation. And it didn't end up being it. And what God was showing us was that there was more below the surface. There was fear that we hadn't addressed. And actually, what we thought was God's knowing was a projection and an inflation from that fear. And so we do have to go through a process of having spiritual ego dismantled. But once we go through that process, we go through a descent and we begin to work through this fear, then we move into a space where we truly get to the core and we truly get to the fucking root. And now we've had the spiritual ego dismantled and we've gone through a process where ways that the ego tried to construct something, we had that dismantled and we moved into the wide open sort of abyss. And been in that space where it's a vast emptiness of the unknown and we don't know what we're going to do. And we've had to live there and learn to build kind of a new home and a new construction of a paradigm and a reality in that place. We've had the spiritual ego dismantled. This is why I talk a lot in my work about something like an attachment rupture, which is really what it actually means. It's a dismantling of the spiritual ego. It's a way where everywhere that we sort of spiritually inflate, that balloon gets popped. That balloon gets popped. And I talk about how oftentimes it comes in the form of the breaking apart of a romantic relationship, right? A breaking apart of a romantic relationship. And through that rupture, what it's doing is it's God directing us to the core root of our fear, which usually is in the form of attachment, ways that we tether to the family of origin, ways that we tether to the ancestors of origin, the ways that we stay binded in karmic contracts with the lineage that hold us in place. Because what's happening is the ego-driven, fear-based survival mind and body is trying to find a point of tether. Imagine a boat that's trying to find a dock that it can tie up to. That we fear if we lose those tethers and cords, will be untethered and unhinged. And then deep fear starts to come, right? Deep fear starts to come because we don't have those tethers. What happens when you break this attachment? Now fear that's been binded by cords and clamped down begins to sort of move like this, and it's kind of in the ether around us. This is why this portal that's happened for the past 3 months, all this fear and all this unworthiness, what it was revealing was certain ways that these tethers and cords were still clamping the body down. They were still clamping the body down. And now as they get pulled out and they get sort of ruptured, the balloon gets popped, spiritual ego gets dismantled. Now fear's sort of alive. And now what's happening is this is where people can get really, really stuck, where people can get really stuck in sort of idle stagnation. Because what's happening is there's a shift. God is prompting a shift that is so fucking real in your body. And he's trying to move you into a new paradigm and say, can you trust it? He's gifting you something. Can you trust it? And again, what happens is the way that we try to survive, the way the human vessel tries to survive in the fear is saying, I don't know, or I don't know what's happening, or we procrastinate, we push something aside, right? And again, this comes back to that statement of, I don't know what's happening. What's true is a part of you knows exactly what's happening. And so when I work with clients, I get them to confront fear with reality statements. A part of me knows exactly what's happening. Now what happens is we're trying to build a new neural network. We're trying to build a new pathway in the body. When you say, a part of me knows exactly what's happening. When you're in a sea of the unknown and you feel lost and confused, I guarantee a part of you knows exactly what's happening. And your capacity to be in that space of a part of me knows what's happening, that is your capacity for God, the godly self, to rise. Now what you're doing is you're giving momentum to a new neural network that is trying to build in your body. I would call this neural network the one of the godly self or the higher self. Our higher self is our godly self. They're synonymous. And so when you say a part of me knows exactly what's happening, and we're trying to get to this pure of a knowing, this pure unobstructed frequency that downloads as a transmission through us that we don't push away. A part of me knows. Now what happens when someone says a part of me knows what's happening, automatically we start to feel a little bit safer. When we say, I don't know what's happening, what we're doing is we're reinforcing and we're reaffirming the neural network of fear, of contraction, of being immobilized in our nervous system. So think of the nervous system responds through a spine and brain combination, through the central nervous system. That sometimes it's something we say, thoughts we have that are prompting and promoting an experience that causes the spine to perceive threats, which is feeding information to our nervous system to move into an immobilized state that we have to perceive threats. What we give attention to grows, right? What we give attention to grows. So we keep saying, I don't know what's happening. I'm lost. I don't know what's happening. When we hammer down on that, what we're doing is we're continuing to reinforce the survival body. We're continuing to reinforce the survival body, which means your brain is sending signals to your spine. Get ready for a threat. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what's happening. This promotes feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, which eventually leads to feelings of anxiety and depression, which is basically fear that has been unprocessed in the body. And if it lingers long enough, it clamps down, it freezes in the nervous system, and it creates anxiety and depression. And so what happens is what we give attention to grows. When you say to yourself, a part of me knows what's happening, what you're doing is you're beginning to create a environment in the body of more optimism, of hopefulness. You're beginning to illuminate the cord in the body of safety, And what happens when you're trying to lead yourself in a spiritual awakening or through a spiritual initiation? You're trying to illuminate a neural network in your system, a level of safety that you've never accessed before, right? You're having to expect, you're meeting an edge, and you're having to expand your capacity to move that edge, right? This is what's happening at a nervous system level through a spiritual awakening. You're constantly coming up to an edge that you're having to expand. And what happens with people is they come up to that edge, they feel that's happening, and they get stuck. They get stuck. And sometimes they get stuck for years and years and years. And what the main thing of why this is happening is because they, for one, potentially through some divine orchestration, this has had to be the level of karma and the level of time frame and time period that we've had to go through so we can integrate and move maybe the fear and the energy through the body. But I would also say it's what we're reinforcing and reaffirming in our body and our reality. It's as simple as, where are we putting our attention? And the reason why we put our attention in a place of I don't know, it's one of the most insidious ways that we sabotage the new earth. It's one of the most insidious ways that we sabotage our power. Again, we move into a default affirmation in the body so we don't have to move forward. So our life doesn't have to change. Ultimately, so we don't have to experience just how powerful we are. Because if we begin to reinforce and reaffirm the thread and cord, maybe that all of us knows what's happening, or maybe it's just a part. And eventually what you start off being like, a part of me knows what's happening, or a part of me is really feeling strongly that 2025 is going to be this year, until it gets to a point where God speaks to us louder and louder, and we trust the transmission. We trust the frequency that is spoken through us. We trust the purity that we feel in our vessel and the message that comes to us. And we really do begin to move into a space of all-knowing. We really do move into a space of all-knowing, or the knowing increases. So maybe it comes to a point where a really large part of me knows what's happening. Like, 3/4 of me are really feeling this. And then there's another quarter, which is fear. But the reason why people stay, so you guys, if we're stuck in stagnation or we can't move forward in a spiritual awakening, what it means is that we're immobilized in a fear or threat response. If we can't move forward, or if we feel like we're idle in the same sort of circling, we haven't been able to move forward, it means that we're immobilized in a fear or threat response. And one of the main reasons is because we're reaffirming the neural network of fear. right? And the way that we get out of that is we begin to move, and the way that we always deal with fear is that we have to, from a neutral place in the body, be able to confront fear with reality. Fear hates reality. Fear loves delusion. Fear loves delusion. Think about um fear and like God, they're almost opposite ends of the spectrum, right? And they have some form of delusion, because the fear might at most have a partial truth. The fear at most might have a partial truth. And fear hates it when we begin to confront it with a neutral reality, because now what happens is we begin to diffuse the sensory experience. So put it this way, you guys: excitement and fear have the same chemical response in the body. Excitement and fear have the same chemical response, but one is positive and one is negative, right? And think about when we're excited. What happens is we keep feeding it. We keep feeding it. And we feel more excited, more excited, more excited. Fear is the same thing. We keep feeding it. We keep feeding it. We keep feeding it. And this is why, with fear, when we confront it with reality, it starts to diffuse the sensory experience of fear, and we're able to change and alter the course. And now we're able to change how the central nervous system is responding. Now we're able to change how the central nervous system is responding. A part of me knows exactly what's happening. A part of me knows what's happening. As we reaffirm and bring our awareness and attention to this, now what happens is God in the body gets stronger. Think about, you guys, your higher self. If you had to relate your higher self, or the highest possible version of you, you would probably see in your mind's eye a version of you that was in so much joy, that it was so light, it was so bright, um, so much freedom, just complete and utter liberation. But that higher self probably wildly trusted themselves, probably reacted and responded confidently. That higher self went for it. That higher self knew exactly the path. That higher self is dialed completely in. So when we move into a vibration of the higher self, or the highest possible timeline, it means our trust in ourself and our trust in God is becoming really, really potent and powerful. When you move into a vibration of the higher self, what it really means is the all-knowing inside of you, the godly self, is able to lead and guide your fear-driven inner child. The higher self is able to lead and guide the fear-driven self, meaning even when fear is present, the knowing, or the all-knowing inside of you, is louder, and it's able to hold the hand and be like, this is exactly the way. This is exactly the way that we have to go. Now what happens is our edge of our nervous system begins to expand. Our ancestors start to release. And we start to move out of stagnation in the spiritual awakening and spiritual initiation process in a way that had always been elusive to us. Maybe we have been stuck here for a few years, and it finally clicks into place. It finally clicks into place, and we get it. We understand it. We're like, oh shit. And now it changes in our body, where we're able to guide ourselves in a way we never been able to. And the reason why this is so challenging, you guys, because in a spiritual awakening is you're building a paradigm that has never existed before. That's the most challenging thing in a spiritual awakening or a spiritual initiation. You're changing, you're up-leveling, means you're having to create a whole new ecosystem of safety in your body. Think about that. Think about how challenging that is, right? Everything that you had clung on to safety is now being reconfigured in your body. And so everything changes. And this is why I use this framework of divine reparenting for getting out of stagnation, getting out of idle immobilization in our system when we're going through an awakening process, when God is anointing us, when God is calling us. Because now you're going to have to build a paradigm through your own self-invention and your own self-creation that has never existed before, is also never existed for your ancestors. And your ancestors are going to hold on in your body until they feel you building this new paradigm, this new sort of ecosystem. And they're like, oh, fuck, Jamie gets it. Or I actually trust Jamie. I trust him in what he's doing. I trust him in what lives through him. I trust him. And so the ancestors leave. And when the ancestors begin to leave, it's just clearing house, clearing house. And now the tethers and cords release, release. And this is really where the divine happens. And now, if you're that boat that felt like it had to be tied up to the dock, you can be in the wide open ocean and you drop an anchor. It's God dropping an anchor in the wide open ocean. Essentially, what's happening in the wide open space, without all those attachment cords and tethers that you had binded inside of you, those are gone, and you create your new sort of ecosystem in the middle of the ocean. And now what happens is that all knowing in your body begins to lead the inner child. Begins to lead the inner child. And so now you can actually expand the edge of your system, and you begin to lead yourself out of stagnation, being idle and immobilization, and you actually start to integrate the spiritual awakening. You actually start to move forward into the new earth. You actually start to move forward into the brand new paradigm that is asking to be created. And for example, me as a spiritual teacher, what I see my work is doing is anchoring a new paradigm for other people to begin to identify with. I see the work as being a spiritual teacher of having to, in my own body, create and anchor a new paradigm, a new identification of a paradigm that other people can begin to feel, resonate with, and be able to identify with, which helps to reaffirm and mirror their own reality back to them. Which now it creates, we feel a little more known, a little more understood, right? But we have to become that beacon for ourselves. You have to be able to see yourself in a wide open space when nobody can see you, and you trust it. You trust what is coming through you. But in the beginning, it feels probably like delusion a little bit. You're like, maybe I'm delusional. And you need some of that. You need some delusion to take a step, right? Think about, we need some dose of delusion to do anything. If we had no sense of delusion, we would live the most pragmatic, practical life, and we would never take a risk. We would never move forward. We would never create something great or something revolutionary. So we need some sort of delusion to even be able to take a fucking step, to even just be able to move forward. And so divine reparenting is this idea of there's a godly self. When I say the godly self, it's the all-knowing. When I say the higher self or the godly self, what I mean, how I'd land that, it's the part of you that knows what's going on, right? It's the part of you that knows what's going on. And the reason why people shut down their spiritual gifts is they're afraid of how much they actually know. They're afraid of how powerful they actually are. They're afraid of how much energy they can actually access. And if we start to create statements, a part of me knows, now we're beginning to feed our gifts. We're beginning to feed the magic inside of us. And this is what we're afraid of. And so the reason, you guys, why we stay idle, why we stay stagnant in a spiritual awakening, the number one reason is we're afraid of our magic. We're afraid of our power. We're afraid for God to become realized through us. And that's why we allow the fear to live so loudly. It's an insidious form of self-sabotage that is probably happening at an unconscious level in the body. And what happens is, as we become more and more awake, the fear, the self-sabotage becomes more and more conscious. The more and more conscious something becomes, the more a pattern is about to shift. The more conscious something becomes, the more a shift is about to take place. When patterns aren't ready to change, they live unconsciously. That's why being aware of something, awareness, moving, it becomes conscious. It's starting to shift. The dials are moving. Now what this means is something is about to shift. And so what happens eventually, we're in stagnation unconsciously. As we start to heal, as we start to grow, now the sabotage and the stagnation becomes more conscious, because the deeper levels of fear are being brought up in the body. The deeper levels of fear are being brought up in the body. And so now, if we sabotage or we are in stagnation or we're idle, it feels really conscious. This is where things become really painful, right? So what happened? What the direct intervention from source and spirit was with this portal that happened this fall was trying to make our stagnation really, really conscious. It was trying to make our fear really, really conscious. So September, October, November, double eclipse, the age of Aquarius, the solar flare, it was trying to make our suffering really, really conscious, right? So when suffering becomes really, really conscious, it means something's about to turn. It means something's about to break through. It means something's about to shift, right? So we know when suffering's becoming really conscious, we're at a point where we're about to break through. We're about ready to create this shift, right? And this is in the place where what's trying to break through in your body is that the godly self, the goddess self, the higher self can lead the unsure parts of you, right? So as I move into the year 2025, that the higher self of me, the part of me that knows, if you really fucking feel into that, any part of me that doubts or is insecure or feels fear or the godly self in me is strong enough that I can lead myself. I can lead myself in a way that I've never led myself. And now we push into new ground. We push into new territory. And ways that we were historically stagnant start to shift. We start to create movement in places of our life that we always felt stuck. And it really does come down to embracing how powerful we are, embracing what we're capable of. And it's even for me, when I say some things, people probably perceive it and they think like it's spiritual ego, when actually the way that it's coming through my body is just, it's like fact. It's like knowing. But people who, haven't had a journey like mine will perceive it from a different place, because they're perceiving it they're perceiving it from their own, what's possible in their system, right? And so when I make very polarizing knowing statements in certain ways, and when it comes to my path, for example, it's coming from a place that's so rooted and anchored in the body, in my divine parent being able to guide and lead myself, and the knowing inside of me, where I would say I'm at the point where a lot of me knows. Obviously we're never going to know everything. We have things that we think are going to be one way, and there's always room for that. And so, we move in a place where a big portion of us knows, and that would be the most accurate thing, right? So when I talk about what I'm perceiving is happening in 2025, 70% of me knows. 70% of me knows. 75% of me knows. That's actually like reality. That's actually reality, but people are afraid to live in that depth of declaration, because they're afraid to find out, oh shit, I am that powerful. Or, I can access that much, or I can do this, right? We're afraid. And so we always give weight to the fear. We always give weight to the doubt, right? We always give weight to the doubt, and it's a way that we bind. It's a way that we don't have to change. It's a way that we can just stay comfortable, right? Because if we start to give weight to the knowing, then our reality will start to shift, and we'll start to move into a totally different vibration. We'll start to move into a totally different vibration, and that's what we're afraid of. And so that's how you get out of being stuck, or stagnant through an initiation or an awakening is that the knowing inside of you gets louder, and you learn to be able to reparent your little boy or your little girl from your higher self, from the godly self. And now your edge begins to expand, and you can lead yourself out of areas you've been historically stuck. And a big part of this, a really big part of this, is the ancestors are observing this. Your lineage and the different patterns and the karmic contracts that have held on in the body, they're witnessing and they're observing. And when they can see the knowing inside of you is getting louder, the ancestors begin to flee the scene. And now your power really grows. This amount of primal energy, this unhinged energy, starts to fucking explode in your body, and it becomes exponential because you're moving more and more in knowing. Your relationship to God's becoming stronger. The ancestors aren't needed as much. The ancestors starting to let go. And the ancestors starting to let go and move back into the earth. And as they move more and more back into the earth, there's less cords and tethers and resistance. The less ancestral interference, the less resistance. And now moving forward or moving into unprecedented territory is more available to you. And you can begin to move forward in a way that you've never moved forward before. And when we're really sort of anointed on this path, we go all the way, removing every tether, every fucking cord, every sort of ancestral piece that's holding on, so we can move into the full primal vibration of our capacity. And God can live through us, unhinged, in our total capacity, so we can create what we're meant to create and what we're meant to offer the collective, and live in a frequency that we're capable of. So that's how you get out of stagnation in a spiritual awakening and a spiritual initiation. God becomes your daddy. Really, God becomes your inner daddy. What's more, God becomes your inner daddy, and you harness and embody that inside of you, and your inner child and the ancestors begin to trust the inner God inside of you. The inner God, God becomes your inner daddy. Your inner child and your ancestors begin to trust this network, this pathway, and this frequency inside of you. And that's when everything starts to change. So I'm going to leave it there. If anyone has any further questions about anything, you can hit me up on Instagram. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Send it to a friend who might resonate with it. Someone who's maybe stuck on their path, stuck on their journey, having a hard time moving forward. Send it to them if it might resonate with them, and help them to even just find a little bit more hope on this path. And if you guys haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, where we just roll with YouTube lives every Monday and Friday. So that's it, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning into this live Friday, December 13th. And wishing everyone a great weekend. And we'll see those of you who show up on Monday for the next live.